Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Jennifer Droblin and I'm a Community Arts Specialist for Arlington County Parks and Rec. And today we're doing our paint and sip. This is going to be our image today. I think it's beautiful because it's a landscape from Arizona. So it's got some really pretty colors. It's got some nice background. The horizon line is quite high. So we're going to try and make sure that we put the horizon line up high. And then we're also going to make sure that as we go back in space, the color gets less and less intense. But you see we've got those bright, beautiful purple, pinky kind of colors in the foreground. And we're gonna make sure we work on those and make that the most vibrant part of our painting. So the very first thing, let's look at our supplies for today. So I have just a lid, and a lid works just perfectly for a palette. You can also use aluminum foil, so you don't need to go out and buy like a fancy palette. Water cup. I've got 3 brushes here. So I have a large, this is a 1-inch brush, a 1/2-inch brush, and a 1/4 inch, and they're all flat. So you see how they have flat tops? I like to work with the flat tops because you can get a nice line if you wanted to. You can also work and add trees and things like that, even though there's not a lot of, well, actually there's no trees. There's one little tiny tree in the tiny corner over here. And of course, because it's there, we have to paint it in. So this is a 20 by 24 canvas, but you can use cardboard if you want. If you don't have canvas, you can also just use really thick white paper. I'm going to use acrylic today, and acrylic paint is polymer based. So you want to make sure that you watch, make sure you don't get them on your clothes, because once it's dry, it's stuck, because polymer is like a plastic and it sticks. So I'm using acrylic today. This is Blick acrylic. This is what the Arlington County Community Arts Unit uses with all of our programs. And you can get it online at dickblick.com. And so what I have is the 3 primary colors. So I have an ultramarine blue, I have a chrome yellow, and I have a magenta. And I'm letting you see the dirty ones for character. Because we use these a lot. And then this is Mars Black and Titanium White. So we have the 3 primary colors, and that's really all we need to make our painting today. And then we've got Titanium White and the black to do the value scale. So to make our primary colors and our secondary colors lighter and darker. I also scored a Dollar Tree sponge. This is a bath sponge I got at the Dollar Tree. And what I like to do is I buy these large sponges for $1. They're natural sponges. And I just tear them up. And I can get maybe like 6 or 12 sponges, depending on, how often or how much you want to tear. Depending on how much you want to tear the sponge, you can make them larger or you can make them smaller. I'm going to have just a couple different sizes here because I think we could do a lot with this large sponge. Some paper towels. I'm also going to use an old, outdated either credit card or a key card or this is like a loyalty card. But just make sure that it's your standard like plastic because you can use this as a scraping tool. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do first is put my colors on my palette, the ones that I'm going to start with. And because this painting is mainly that purple color, I want to mix that purple color first. So I'm going to mix the ultramarine blue I'm going to take the lid off. Ultramarine blue. And this is magenta, which is going to give us a really nice purple. And I'm going to just mix it together with my sponge. So this is just my background color. And the very first thing I want to do is I really just want to fill the canvas with this color. because it should be a little bit more blue up top. Because sometimes the canvas is really intimidating when it's all just white. And, you know, I want to make sure I cover it all so I can get that out of my mindset of being intimidated by this white canvas. So I'm just going to just spread this color around with the sponge. And it looks like I'm going to save some of this magenta in the side of my palette, because when we get to do those really bright ones in the foreground, we want to make sure we include this color because it looks actually pretty close to what we need for the, sorry, I'm going to just, and if I need to, you can add a little bit of water just to lighten that up a little bit and make it a little bit easier to cover. Because this, again, is the underpainting, so no one's going to see this in the end. But the reason why we cover the whole thing is, like I said, get out of that mindset of having a blank canvas. And then also, we're going to use this underpainting to kind of draw in where our horizon line goes and some of these other features. And I'm just kind of doing a sweep all the way across, because I really would like for it to be horizontal. Most marks that we make today, we want to make sure we follow the direction of what we're painting. So for here, I'm going to take a little bit of water, and I'm just going to kind of carve in where my horizon line is going to go. And I would say it's probably about a quarter, almost a quarter. Yeah, I would say 1 part halfway is where the yellow bushes are, and then 3/4 are, so that's about right. It's about 1/4. So if I do that, that's about half. Yeah, I think that's where we want to go. And then I can take my paper towel and kind of just draw in where my horizon line goes. So I'm not really using a pencil or anything. I'm just kind of like giving myself some guidelines just by taking a little bit of water and removing some of this acrylic paint. And then also, because we've got some really light areas here where the sky meets those mountains, I'm going to reduce and take some of this away too, because that's going to come in handy when we add our lighter color of the atmosphere. So you see, we're just kind of taking and removing some of it. And then when you stand back from it, you start to see, oh yeah, it's starting to come along. All right. Now what I want to do is I want to add some of this bluish purple. So there's this blue purple here that's already here. But what I want to do is I want to make it a little bit darker. And I want to make it a little bit green. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow, because yellow and blue make green, and I'm going to put it away from the red, because if you mix 3 primary colors together, if you mix the red, the blue, and the yellow together, you get brown. But I want it to be a little bit green, so I'm just going to take and mix a little bit of a green here. It's going to be a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to just kind of cover again with my sponge what's going on in the middle here. And essentially what we're doing is we're toning the paper or the canvas or whatever you're working with so that you can go back in with it layer after layer. And with every layer, you're going to make it a little bit more dimensional. And also the beauty of using acrylic is it dries very quick. And see, I'm kind of altering how I apply the sponge. Because remember, every bit counts. Even though you're going to be covering over some areas, every bit's going to count in the final bit here. And I would say here's what that's about right, is where just underneath the halfway point, let's see, here's the halfway point. And then just underneath the halfway point is where that rock starts. So I want to make sure I add that little guy in, because this is going to be the other line for the flowers. Okay. And again, we're saving, you see this is my palette, we're saving this color that we have at the beginning. And I am a messy palette worker, so so you can see I already have my fingers dirty. I've got this paint that's smearing around, and that's okay, right? That just means you're an artist. So again, I'm going to start to add a little bit more of this middle ground here. And this middle ground, I'm going to just kind of move my sponge in a way so that I'm kind of matching this landscape area. And we're letting things dry in between layers because, like I said, with every layer you put of acrylic, you'll get a fresh color. If you use watercolor, this won't work. But if you use acrylic or tempera for this process, or like a acrylic gouache, there's that exists too in the world. It will help you to sort of let things dry, and then you can add more and more around it. So there is a lot of little purple. You may not see it in this picture by itself, but hopefully in your picture you can kind of see there's some little lavender and purple bits that's really just kind of reflecting these flowers that are back in space, way farther back in space, and there's the atmosphere of the blue. So again, we're just going to plug this in. And as we go down, we're a little bit even more green. But I'm going to be very strategic about where I'm going to put that, because there's some bands of color that are kind of peeking through that are this yellowy green color. And again, this is just layer number one. So if you're not feeling it this layer, you'll feel it the next layer, because it's going to get a little bit more defined as we go. And we're also putting this foreground color in, because when we let this dry and we start to go back in with these brighter flowers, you'll see it'll pop. It'll make the magenta color pop. And again, I'm just lightly brushing in. I want to smear that a little bit because that was a little bit intense. You can see it up top here. And we're just kind of entering this area in the middle. Okay. All right. Now, because we've got a little bit more blue and purple, we're going to just kind of dip. I'm going to move. Actually, you could take another sponge if you want. Let's do that. We're just going to take a different sponge, and we're going to do a little bit of that blue and red, that little more blue-purple color. And again, since it's the first layer, we can add just a tiny bit of water just to let it, just to coat it more easily. And we're going to just dab in with the sponge this bluish color. And kind of looking to see where these mountains are and how they're going. And because we have that bright magenta in there, it's going to make things nice, because all we have to do is just add this blue over top and soften and lighten it, and it's going to look like these mountains are way back in space. But see, I'm going to also like push down because you see these mountains go in a different direction. And then up top, they kind of look a little more ridgy. So I just want to make sure I add in that blue. You can kind of see it gets a little blue up here, and then it gets really light. So let's just, for fun, I can just put in that light. And you see, again, I'm using the sponge because it's got like, there's things happening back there. So I'm just softening that up. Okay, so I'm just going to work this area a little bit more because there's all sorts of stuff happening back here. And I'm kind of, like I said, just kind of going in the direction of the landscape with my sponge. I haven't even touched my brushes yet. And I want to just kind of go and find some of these areas to work in here. And I'm just going to use my finger. This is probably, my finger is my favorite tool because you can just sort of just, and look at my hands are already dirty. So you can kind of get like a really perfect sort of a mark just by adding that little bit. Let me make it just a little bit wider. So you kind of have right now a good start. And all we did was use sponges. That's it. It was sponges and paint and a little bit of paper towel. Okay, so we have a pretty good map for where we're going to start to add these colors. So I want to keep going with this like green color that is kind of like peeking through. And again, we're going to save some of these. So where we find like a darker band here, and then there's a darker band of green that comes down here and right in here in front. The more you're towards the bottom of the painting, the more high contrast it becomes. So these are going to be like a darker, we're going to add a much darker tone down here and a tone down here that's a little bit darker, add a swath of dark green here, and then everything else is going to go lighter. So I'm going to take that sponge that I had before. Yeah, we're going to take, and I'm going to mix a dark blue, and I'm going to add a little bit of the yellow. We have a dark green, and I'm just going to, like, again, just using my sponge, I'm going to plug in some of this area where this band of color goes. And I'm just using the edge of my sponge. You can cut your sponges to be a certain way too, but for this point, it's really important just to kind of give your painting some texture, because when you start to plug those flowers in, you're going to want that in your background. And you see we've got a little bit of that purple coming through, and that's going to help us later as we put those flowers in. Again, there's a darker band, so I'm going to mix that green again. And there's a dark band down here. And again, I'm just sort of sponging it in. That's great. And then we're going to add some colors along this break in the land, because looks like it goes back in space even more. So I'm just going to add a little bit of that down here in that middle area, because those bright yellow flowers we're going to do separately once the paint is dry. And here we can kind of go into our where we drew that line, our little map. And you're just going to find, because the magenta paint is dry, just find some of those areas to cover over. But again, don't pull all of this pink away because you're going to need it. You're going to need it, so make sure you save it. And need to make that green. I don't know why I went in with straight blue. Again, just using the sponge as the tool. You can see these flowers here have a little bit more green in it. So I'm going to work that. And then also up here, there's some brighter green. And again, just sponging that in, letting the sponge do the work. So you're also, as you're going and you're letting things dry, you're adding texture. You're building all kinds of texture. And that's going to help you too when you do your final marks. I'm just going to plug some of these things in. And again, try not to cover too much of that magenta because that's going to only help us as we let things dry and move forward. At this point, you may be thinking to yourself, this isn't working. But keep with me. Stay with the process, because I can assure you that when we're done, you're going to have a beautiful landscape. It's easy to get discouraged when painting is a very patient activity. You want to work in layers. You just have to find what is in the farthest behind in the landscape, what's the farthest in the background. Find those things first, and then work towards the foreground. Here's where my rock is, and there's a little dark shadow there, so I want to make sure I put that in. Okay, and there's another little rock there hiding. Okay, all right. So I'm going to pop my sponges in the water and rinse them, give them a good rinse. Also will help my hands get a little bit more clean. All right, and now we're just going to as we let things dry a little bit, we can take a look. It's always good to step back from your painting as you're working so you can kind of see, especially when you're copying from a photograph, you want to be able to see where you want to add your stuff. So I see immediately that horizon line that I placed in, I think I need to now put that ridge line, and that ridge line is going to help make it pop. So I'm going to take some of that yellow, and actually what I'll do right now is I will mix. I'm going to mix like a yellow orange. So I need red, and I need a bunch of yellow. So that looks good. And I think these guys are dry enough that I can work in here. Yeah, touch your canvas or your paper to make sure it's dry before you do this, because you don't want it to blend. You really don't want it to blend. So, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sponge again, and I'm going to take the color, and I'm just going to dab over here, up top here, where I see those colors along the ridge. And again, don't fret, because we're going to do a little bit more to this where it will start to make some sense. And then you see that yellow is up here as well. So I take and move it a little bit more yellow, and we're just going to drop this in. Because there's green in there still, we want to mix, but then we also want to let this dry and add so that we can get that orange in there too. And then wherever you see that color, just plop it in. So you see how it's going in that magenta and it's making it more orange? That's what we're looking for. At this point, I'm using almost pure yellow and just blending it in. But I'm not putting anything really in this band. I want to do a little bit here because up here is where there's highlights, but really down here is where I want to get all that work in. And again, I'm just using the sponge, like I'm just doing little hash marks because we're not getting detailed yet. Again, what we're doing is we're making this look like a landscape with layers of color. And then when we get to the final bits, we're really going to push some of that magenta in the foreground. Right now there's those yellow flowers that are kind of mixed in, so I want to include those as well. This now is getting a little orange again. And again, there's those, almost gives the illusion of there's purple in there, yellow, there's orange, all sorts of stuff going on. And this yellow is going to show up again once this is dry. When we start to make our magenta flowers in the foreground, they're going to really pop because we've got this underneath. So don't be afraid to just slather on the paint because that's when it's fun. If you stress yourself out by wanting to be perfect straight away, you're going to hate painting. And then you're never going to want to do it again. Then I'll be really sad. Okay. Again, I'm going to take, because this is like a greenish blue, I'm going to go back in. But this time, I'm going to add just a tiny bit of that orange because I want it to be like a dull, kind of a bluish green color. And I just kind of want to dab that in too. Maybe a little bit more blue. And putting a little bit of that orange in there because it will break it down just a little bit. And so it blends with this these mountain areas that are starting to emerge. And just kind of make sure it dabs into this area here. To kind of show that there's like there's another level of ground back there before it even gets to the mountains. And I'm going to take now that blue and white because it's a much cooler color. I'm going to get into that magenta a little bit that I used initially. And I'm going to just streak in with my sponge these colors. To make it just sort of go back into space. You can kind of see a ridge line there. And bring it down to that green area. And we're also going to do another layer here before we move on. But I just want to get that so that that horizon line is more defined. Actually kind of comes down a little bit. Remember, this is just another layer. And see, just with this sponge, what you can do is kind of amazing. All right, take a step back and see what you think. And I'm realizing now that this area needs to be much brighter. Up here needs to be much brighter too. So I want to start to add, while this is drying, this area up here is drying, I want to start to now switch over to another clean sponge. And I'm going to mix that orange again. So that's red and the yellow. If you feel like yours is mixing a little too much on your palette, then you can just clean it off, take a break, and clean it off and start again. Just make sure you, this thing, all right. And I'm just gonna now come in and really start to find some of those punches of orange, a little bit of yellow. Just to add some more depth to what we're making. And if you want to, you can dab, but you can also mix on the surface. It doesn't have to be perfect because, again, this is just another layer. But you do want to add so that there's some green areas in there. And just by adding some orange, that's going to give you enough of that color to give you some of that brown effect. And there's some areas here that are a little bit duller, so that's when we start to add, because we've made it orange, we're going to add a little bit of blue, and the blue is the complement to orange. And we're just going to sort of drag and drop. The good old drag and drop, right? All right. See, and you didn't think you could do it in an hour, but we're going to pull it off then. So I'm going to just kind of add in this brighter color, because now I'm starting to see it emerge in my painting. I'm going to just add a little bit more red. Okay. So it's just coming in through those colors. Right now we're doing the back sides of these yellow flowers. When we do the front sides, we're going to add a little bit of opaque. So we're going to make, right now this yellow is very transparent. So we're going to have to add white to make it so that it becomes opaque. All right. And then I'm going to just get a little crazy with the yellow as we get closer to the foreground, because that really does get bright towards the bottom. And remember, we're just using the primary colors, black and white. You don't need to go to the store and buy a bunch of different colors. That's crazy. You just need your primaries. My only recommendation there is that you want to use, I'm adding green now, by the way. You want to use the same color mixing set from the same company, because their mixing sets, if you get a red from one company, a yellow from another company, and a blue from a different company, they may not mix as well as if you get them from the same company, because a mixing set is usually formulated to mix the best together when you buy them from the same place. All right. We're almost to the point where we can start putting those flowers in, because you know that's the best part, right? This is like, that's like the meat of the painting, is like the really beautiful bits of, that we're going to use with the brush. Yeah. And then, oh, now here's where, because this area up here is dry, here's where we can get really, really fancy. And here's where we're going to take our card. And I'm going to mix this blue and white and a little bit of that magenta again. And maybe just up here, just a tiny bit of, let's start with that. A little bit of ethereal blue. Because there is a little bit of this mountain. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to paint my card just like this. Make sure it's the color I want. And you're just going to do this, you're going to kind of scrape it and sweep it. And you can sweep it however you want. But you see all that stuff that's going on back there? You want to include it. So all I'm doing is like a scrape and sweep sort of thing. And it kind of comes down. Just so that you kind of show those mountains a certain way. And if it's too bright, don't worry. You can just soften it with your fingers. But you want to make sure you get that in. And there's a little bit of the white up here. I'm just going to take a little bit of that and put it over here. So we're starting to see a little bit more of the mountains. I'm going to bring this down a little bit because it kind of just shows that there's some foreground action there. Okay. So that's kind of nice. And then we're going to do the same thing here with the green. So there's like this layer of green, greeny, bluey, purpley. It's hard to describe. But it's It's kind of like if you mix that magenta together and you add a little bit of yellow. I just want to make it a little bit more blue. Okay. We're going to do the same thing. Just paint the edge. And then you're just going to come along and you're going to just kind of give yourself some of the landscape. If you did too much, that's cool. You can always go back. Remember, it's just another layer. Just another layer. And there's even some little things going on here. Oop, that might be a little much. Let's just scoot that right up. If you make a mistake, no problem. Take a wet paper towel and just clean that up. And then, you can just find some of these areas. But I'm going to make them a little bit more purple, I think. Sorry. I think I'm going to make them a little more green. So as we come down, it's going to be made a little bit more green. And again, this is helping us get it done, right? It's just helping us get it done. And all I'm doing is just sort of dabbing with my card. No big deal. It's like a dab and scrape. Just to get some of that in. And if you have too much of it, it's okay. Just move it down a little. Turn the card, keep going. Okay. And when you just clean off your card, you could just swipe it with the paper towel, and you're good to go. All right. Now I'm going to tease you a little bit more with just more of the yellow, and then we're going to do the magenta in the middle. So I'm going to clean my brush. And like I said, I want to make these bits now a little bit more opaque. And I have my sponge again, and my sponge is going to be perfect for this step. Because I get like this nice rough edge. And you can even tear it a couple times, right? So you can have a nice, interesting shape of sponge. And this time, I'm going to mix that orange with a little more yellow, and then a little bit of white, because I want to make it opaque. And I'm just going to test it out on my paper towel, and then I'm just going to dab this in. However you like. But I want to make sure that all those colors, especially down here, just kind of spread it a little. And it looks like it comes down. You see how it gives that nice effect of flowers. Make them a little more yellow. And you see all that work that we did before is now starting to really pop. All just by gently dabbing. Oops. And if it's too bright, which is what I just did, you just keep going. And you make it a little bit more, you mix it on the palette. And just make that color again, but don't add the white because you already have it on your canvas. And just go over it, and instantly you can break it down and even add a little bit of the light over here because that's pretty much where we see it even comes up even a little higher here. And here you can kind of see now in the foreground, you got some stuff happening here. So we're going to add that in. It's here, right here. So this little bit right here is what we're talking about. Those lines, we want to add those in too. And I think I'm going to just, if you want, you can do this too. Like I said, if you think you did a little bit too much, you can just drag it down and you can scrape it up. A little bit too white for my taste right now. All I did was just scrape it a little bit and drag it down. We'll let that dry and we'll go over with another little layer of the darker, and I think that'll fix our problem. Okay, so now we just want to go and find some of these lighter areas that are within this foreground. So with that, we're going to again find the oranges, yellow and red. There's already a little bit of white on my sponge, so that's cool. And we're just going to find these little areas. This time I'm just going to sort of, again, like drag and drop, but allowing the sponge to do all the work for me. The sponge is going to do all the work. All I'm doing really is flicking my wrist. You can kind of see up here, there's some stuff happening here. And I'm working from down, sweeping up. There's some other. I'm just gonna, because we got it kind of dry, I want to dab, 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 dab. So get all the little bits and pieces in. I still feel like I didn't get light enough, so we're going to have to do that too. So I'm going to just get a little bit lighter here, because that light is really intense. See, just touches with the sponge. Kind of goes just down into this little bit here. Okay. All right. Now comes the best part. The part we've all been waiting for, right? Is we are going to do these flowers while we let this area dry, and then we're going to finish up with really focusing on that horizon line and making it pop. So for this, I'm going to get the blue. And I get my sponge. Mix that magenta with a little bit of white. But it's really, really red. That red and blue. I want it to be even more. I might have to do a little magic on my palette. Let me mix it straight. Let me just take my brush and fizz. It's mixing with that yellow, so it's dulling it down a little. Okay, and then a little bit of white. And then we'll see where we're at. It's not as purple as I want it. So I started with a clean palette. I went ahead and rinsed everything off because sometimes you just need to get a clean space to do what you need in the foreground. You don't want anything clouding your colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this dark purple first that has a little bit of a base already, so we can kind of see where those colors are. And again, I'm just sponging the colors. And it's just a really nice line of that color. You can kind of see it form here. We're just giving ourselves the foundation for the brighter colors. So we're just going to find all those purple areas. There's some stuff over here. And you can even find some of those colors here. And what's nice is that you've already have your dark surface on there first. So when you go to add your lighter stuff, it's just gonna pop. And again, just make it kind of sparing, because in the back, you don't want to make your middle ground the same color as your foreground. It's a little bit duller. So try to blend in that color a little bit and have it mixed in with the stuff that's underneath. You see how this color now is pushed back a little bit in space, and then we've got this. We're going to use the same color, but we're going to really, really make it pop with these other purple flowers. So you're just going to just keep going, and this time I'm just like dabbing and dropping. Dab and drop. Giving our flowers a place to rest when it's time. There's just fewer but brighter stuff in between here. Try not to cover up the work you did. If you did, no problem. You can always put them back. Just giving these guys a place to live. And you can see, like, as you get more and more color in there, when it hits those dry areas, it really does make them come through a little bit better. So I'm just gonna make it a little bit more red. And my sponge is gonna be a little less wet. So what I'm gonna do, I'm using the side, I'm gonna use a little bit of the side that is torn, because that's gonna give me a little bit more texture. And again, I'm just dabbing. See how it kind of makes a difference in what we got going on in here. Just a dry noise. I'm going to try and make it stop. So you get all those tones in. And again, like I said, this is a patient activity. So if you find as you're done, when we're finished together, take a day, step away from it, and then come back to it. And you can keep adding, because at this point, you've committed to the whole painting. And now you can really focus on the joy of painting. And that joy of painting is really literally just taking brushes and putting those dabs in. Because masterpieces don't happen in an hour. They happen in many hours. All right, so now what I'm doing is I'm going in, same deal, with a little bit of the white mixed with that color, just to make it lighter. And that's going to show some of the highlights of these flowers and make some of them really stand out. A little more red. Make them really pop. They have to really pop in the foreground to show that they're coming forward in space. So we really barely, I don't know if we did. We used a little bit of some different tools. Didn't really get into the brush very much, but that could be our next step. But if you're liking working with your sponge, stick with it. Sponges are great for doing landscapes. All these different tones. And have it just come forward. I'm kind of liking it. And you got a little bit of lighter stuff happening up here. I want to make sure we put that in. Oops. A little more red and less blue. Again, we're just painting it in, dabbing, leaving some areas green, making sure some areas get really a punch of color. I'm almost going in with a straight red because I realized I added a little too much blue in that. And again, I'm turning my sponge because I want it to have the texture side. Actually, use a different sponge. Maybe use a different sponge. This time I'm gonna, oh, that one has paint on it. Let's try another piece. And again, I'm gonna fluff that edge. And again, I'm just gonna dab in some really bright red. It's all gonna mix really nicely. And you're just gonna build it up so you're giving the illusion. Go. All right. Now our very last step really is going to just be further define, get a little bit blue, a little bit of band of blue. I didn't put that rock in, but that's okay. Well, I kind of just did. There's a rock now. That's the back side of the rock. And here's where I'm going to use my brush. And I'm just going to carve this rock. And it kind of just comes out like that. And he's got a nice edge on this side. And we're going to take and blend that in a little bit. Oops. Oops. That's a very bright rock now. There we go. There we go. And then he's got really nice shadow in between there. There we go. Fixed. And then we've got, while we're here, we can start to put in some of this darker stuff here to further define our mountains here. It's kind of a crispy edge right there. It goes back. There's a face there. Just kind of comes around like this. And there's some stuff happening up here. Comes down. Some shadow. And this is a nice sharp edge here. Comes down. kind of blend that in a little bit, kind of show that that comes in like. For today's purpose, we're not going to paint in that tree because of time, but you can when you're done. And all I'm going to do is just further define this environment back here. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we do want to give it a sense of space. It's a little more shadow. It comes up. And I think I'm going to just take, since I cleaned that up a little bit, now I'm going to just take some color and kind of just show that this is mountain stuff. We're going to call that mountain stuff. And if you want to play and use the cardigan, use that cardigan. Yeah, more mountain stuff. Okay. And that blue automatically makes things, because they're cool, it's going to make things really go back in space. So, okay. And then you're going to take, and I'm going to take my brush. And now here's the bit of it where you're finishing up and you want to make it look painterly. That's the important part, is you want to add some marks that aren't like sponge so that you make it look like everything's intentional. And you could do that with your brush. So I'm taking my flat brush and I'm just going to take some of these areas that I know, and I'm going to use some value. I'm going to use black now because this is now the final touches. And I'm going to take some white, and I'm just literally going to put in these darker areas. So you can kind of see here there was some nice shadow. And then that just kind of carves into those flowers. There's a little bit of dark purple, so I'm going to find all these places where I see some really deep, intense contrast and plug those in. And we're going to start with the darks first. And I also see more darks here in this area here. And along this edge here. So just adding some of the darker darks that you see. Because now that all this is dry, you can just add contrast and color, and it's going to make it really pop forward. So I'm going to find some of these little areas here. There's a bunch of stuff down here that needs a little bit more contrast. Looks like on this side of here, a little more. And kind of just going in the motion of these puffy little flowers. And if I'm not painting flowers, I'm painting stems. So we're doing all the darks first. Then I'm adding a little bit of yellow to my palette because now I need to find all those areas that need to go where these plants are. So I want to make it a little more green and a little more texture and kind of bump into this area here to kind of show that there's high contrast and that stuff's going on behind. And it looks like because they're like little sprouts, just kind of paint those a little bit everywhere. With a little bit of a dry brush, so it looks like you just got some shade. Get some stuff going on here. Okay. So just cleaning up some of these areas here. And then doing a little bit of contrast here. There you go. And then you're going to do all these little yellow bits that you see. Again, because it's going over the orange, it's going to kind of work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over it with my finger, and that's going to kind of go over some of these other colors. Mix a little bit of kind of strategic about where you want to place these. You don't want to overdo it. You kind of want to have it come down a little bit in less more fashion. Oops. Oops, oops, oops. As we go down, we're going to make it a little more orange. I'm just going to, and here I'm just going to take and press my paintbrush down and drag up, just like we did for the darker colors, to kind of give it just some extra texture. And then I think there's a little bit over. Oops, what is that color? Where did that color come from? Whoops. Oh, I see what happened. Okay, and we just kind of keep peppering it in. And making sure we add lighter as we go. And there's some, if you have little sprouts here, you got some like tall grass. Again, work, just kind of flick it. So put your brush down and then flick it. Oh gosh. Till you get it the way you like it. And then, like I said, you want to make sure you get these things in the front. So now I want to kind of make them look like they're intentional. A little more yellow than that. So you see I'm kind of dabbing this, almost like a tree. Making these a little bit more like flowers, tall flowers. And you don't need a whole lot of them, you just need to give the impression of them, because that's going to be what carries your eye through the rest of the landscape, where you can imagine it is these sprouts are in all these places. So what I'm doing here is I'm like making a stem, and then I'm just taking the side, this is the flat brush again. I'm going to start at the bottom because I don't want to make it too much. I want it to be a little bit more of a dry brush. And I'm just kind of dab. They're kind of curly, so that's all I'm doing. And then I want to put a couple of them closer together so that it looks like there's a bunch of stuff going on in the front. And then we're just going to keep going, add little details. Try to find like your brightest spots and further define those. And here's a trick. If you think you're way too bright, here's one thing you can do. You can take some color and do a bit of a wash. Now that this is completely dry, you can get away with this. But yellow is very transparent, and you can just take and go over that. Smudge it in a little bit, and then you can have a little bit more of your yellow in there. You see how it's just a little bit more. And I want it to be a little softer than that. So I'm just going to go back over with a wet paper towel and soften it. And there you have it. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.